Tips for avoiding conflict. I like to think that conflict can be very much a co-creative situation, the potential for a lot of new understanding and new learning, but that's not always the case. And as a mediator, I also like to be a teacher of ways to avoid conflict that involve skillful communications. So I made my notes in a way that you can share them with me. Avoiding conflict. Number one is to translate. So what is to translate? Somebody approaches you with a problem. Somebody approaches you with a demand. The neighbor says, "Your front lawn is a disgrace." Okay, so I could take this as an insult. I could defend myself. But here's the tip number one, translate. What I can do is translate his articulation into something more collaborative and peaceful. The translation could be into a request, translating to a request. So let's say we're having this conversation not face-to-face, we're using email, voicemail, or text message. So my response could be, "I heard your message, and what I think I'm understanding is you're requesting the front lawn to be cleaner." And in that transition, I also want to ask more questions for clarity. I want to ask, could you tell me specifically what your request is? Could you tell me specifically a timeline? Now, while this may feel like I am giving to somebody who's being demanding, obnoxious, any way I want to interpret it, while this might feel like I'm being generous, I am, but not for the sake of him necessarily, but for the sake of avoiding the conflict. And in the clarification, we might get to the next step where I get to say, "I'll check the city ordinances to see if that particular length of grass or amount of weeds is out of line." So then I could be responding to him in a non-conflictual way, but still holding my own position, which is I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with how the front lawn looks. So the first thing is to translate what's coming at you into a request. Oh, are you requesting that I remove weeds? Are you requesting that I do that in a month's time, in a day, in an hour? Translate it into a request because it'll be easier for me to absorb the request. I made myself a buffer. I also might become a teacher in that moment. Okay, number two, consider. Consider what's being requested. Now that you've translated it and you have that buffer from something obnoxious, something heavy-handed, something demanding or demeaning, consider and let the other know, okay, now that I think I understand what you're asking, let me consider it. Now in this, you've also built yourself another buffer. Why are we building ourselves buffers? Because we deserve it. And because to avoid conflict, we also have to de-escalate ourselves. We're not so interested in necessarily de-escalating someone else. I was recently told by a receptionist on the phone when I was pressing to get a message through to the doctor, okay, calm down. Now when she tells me to calm down, she's escalating the situation, actually. When she takes care of herself, like she could have said, hold on a moment, let me consider what you're asking, and put me on hold. So consider is the second tip for avoiding conflict. Let the other one know, I think I understand now, because you've translated into a request and asked the other to confirm, is that what you're requesting? I think I understand now. Let me consider. Taking the space, it will help you feel re-empowered and staying in your center. The more we can stay in our center, it's the only center we can control, we might be able to avoid the conflict. Take the time to consider. Let the other one know, I'll get back to you tomorrow. I'll get back to you next week I'm going to consider it. And there might indeed be some research you need to do, but emotionally you've de-escalated yourself. Good, so number 3 is actually called Entrust. Yes, I'm giving trust to the other. I think this is showing up backwards on your screen, but you can read backwards. I'm going to give some trust to the other at the completion of this 3-step method of avoiding conflict. Once I've considered and I come back and I say, here's what I can do, whatever that offer is, here's what I could do towards your request. I'm doing this partly because in the spirit of neighborliness, I trust also that when I have a concern, I can bring it to you. So we're setting up the field for literally when we have the next concern, but also we are giving some trust that this will be enough for you. This will feel satisfactory, and that I trust that in the future we will continue to be able to hear each other. So you're entrusting to the other one. I'm doing this, especially if you decide to stretch a little bit and give a little more than you would naturally. I'm doing this because I trust that this will build a rapport so that when I have a concern, you will be responsive, and that you'll understand in the future that I am responsive. Right? That helps disarm the other. That helps de-escalate the situation and de-escalate yourself. Now, I've used the example of the neighbor. It can be a fairly removed relationship. Some of our intimate relationships, co-workers, best friends, partners, husbands, wives, children, parents, these ones can be a lot more challenging because we don't always feel the distance. So I talked about these steps being buffering and setting up a field. Often it helps to feel a little bit of a distance to be able to do that. So that means that our neighbors or the man at the bank or the woman on the receptionist on the telephone give us a great practice ground for these 3 steps, these 3 tips to avoid conflict that we can try to figure out how to do also when we're living potentially in the same house or having a very intimate relationship with someone. So these tips do apply to even those closer relationships. It's just more intricate to figure out how and to get your skills up. So that is what I help people do through mediation and conflict coaching and life transitions counsel. Give me a call if I can help.